It is the biggest criminal trial in the nation, the brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students, Ethan, Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee. The accused killer, a grad student from a neighboring university less than 15 minutes from the crime scene. Investigators have gathered evidence from cell phone data and surveillance cameras tracking the accused killer inside his white Hyundai Elantra. Tonight, we track the escape route, showing you the roads police say he drove after the murders. Could there be any innocent explanation for all of this, or will it help prosecutors prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt?
I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And one part of this quadruple murder of these 4 students that has played a huge role is the fact that it's a small town. Moscow, Idaho, kind of a sleepy town. At least it used to be. And at first, when many of us were looking at this case and it wasn't solved for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, many people were saying perhaps the fact that this happened in a small town is a problem, is a disadvantage. You've got a small police force, not as experienced in these homicide investigations because there just aren't that many homicides in this small community. Well, it turns out that was all wrong. We've learned that investigators were on top of this from the beginning, and Moscow police leading the investigation with the help of the state police of Idaho and the FBI. But they did a great job. Now, the other part of being a small town is that there's not a lot of action. There's not a ton of people or vehicles on the roads. And that actually worked to the advantage of investigators in this case. Now, the actual home where these murders took place is isolated to a certain extent. There's only one way in, one way out to this little enclave of this neighborhood, which has a bunch of rental units, primarily students from the University of Idaho. But it's isolated. So again, this is advantage investigators. There's not a ton of traffic going in and out. And those that go in have to exit out as well. They can't go in and then disappear and never be seen again. Advantage, because again, a case involving surveillance cameras. Now, close by to where this murder scene was is Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is where Washington State University is. So this is really a college area, right? Moscow's a college town, but Pullman's a college town too for WSU. And they're very close to one another. And in this case, as you know, and as investigators have alleged, the killer is from Pullman, less than 15 minutes away, again, in a very small community, isolated scene with not a ton of people. No really big cities anywhere to be seen. So for this suspect in this case, and what is being alleged by investigators, the police, and by prosecutors now, is that on the night of the murders, despite the fact that this car is going from Pullman to Moscow, this relatively short distance, this defendant took some sort of a crazy route. This is a huge part of the case, because not driving directly back and forth and taking a route that's out of the way, that's way out of the way, that takes all of this time in the wee hours of the morning, tells 2 stories. One, it tells the story of where this suspect allegedly was before and after the murders, and also what might be going on in his head and what might he be doing during all that time. And the challenge for this defendant at trial will be twofold. One, challenge to try to prove that, oh, that wasn't me driving the white Elantra. Big challenge there. The second challenge would be perhaps coming up with an innocent explanation for the driving in the wee hours of the morning. Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter is joining us tonight live outside that courthouse in Moscow, Idaho. Chanley, great to see you tonight. So you've been doing a lot of investigating. You've been on the road driving some of these crazy routes. What have you learned about the suspect's alleged route after the murders? What I'm calling really the escape route.
Yeah, last night we talked about the moments leading up to the alleged time of the murders, and now let's talk about what happened after. And you're right, I've seen more of Idaho and Washington State than I ever expected with my team, Paul and Anna. We've been tracking this all out. And what we've been learning, there are several possibilities based on what the affidavit says and the routes that were possibly taken after the murder. We put together a map that highlights all of the names of the towns and communities mentioned in the probable cause affidavit. Look at this area, Vinnie. So we know that he travels from Pullman to Moscow. He turns his phone off. We told you last night around 2:47 a.m. He takes the most direct route to Moscow based on surveillance video following that wine hall de Elantra. And then after the murders, we know his phone comes back on, according to the affidavit, at 4:48 a.m., almost 2 hours later, near Blaine, Idaho. I was there today with my crew. It's very rural. It is a small town, but there is a cell tower called the Blaine Cell Tower in plain view on the very rural gravel road. You could probably ping on that tower from the main highway south out of Moscow, which is I-95 that goes to Lewiston, that we've also been telling you about as well. So we know that his phone is pinging there. It turned back on 4:48 a.m. moving south towards Lewiston, towards Genesee. That's another name that's mentioned off of Highway 95. And then it says the phone is consistent within the about next 30 minutes or so, from 4:50 a.m. to 4:26 a.m. It's moving south, and then it's moving west, crossing the state line towards Uniontown, Washington, and then north through Johnson, as we showed you, into Pullman. But here's what we want to specifically highlight: the possible routes. And in our investigation, being on the ground, traveling this route many times, there are, I believe, 3 routes that are consistent with this affidavit. There's the longest route, which I don't think is the one he took, which is the go down 95 up 195, right? But there is, as I told you the other night, this well-known back road by the locals. It's called Thorn Creek Road. We took that today. We have video of it. You can see the white line kind of in the middle there, that Thorn Creek Road that would go from around Blaine to Uniontown, Washington, and cut through. Here's some video of what that road looks like. And it follows Thorn Creek, a rushing, more like a ditch, really, waterway down the road into Uniontown. That is a well-known, it's paved. It would be an easy, convenient way to cross over, and there is nothing there, Vinnie. There's nothing. There's a look at Thorn Creek right there, the one bridge that you would cross on Thorn Creek Road. Farmland, barns, houses. Even when you get to Uniontown and you go up, back up north towards Johnson, there's not even a gas station. There's not a place to eat. We tried to eat lunch somewhere. There wasn't a place to eat there. And then so I want to move up because and again, that's around 4:50, 5:26, moving up, back up Highway 95 here. And we've been learning about Thorn Creek from the locals. Well, actually, I met a woman today. Her name is Ann, and she is from Blaine, the Blaine, Idaho area. And she had some insightful information. Let's watch.
When I read that, I was horrified. I thought our dogs had been barking like crazy about that time, and I thought, we've been discovered. I mean, Blaine is nothing. There's nothing here. So, it scared me. I think I'm leaning toward the disposing in the river or the creek. He obviously knew what he was doing in some ways. I don't want to give him any elevation in the press or in the media or anything, but, you know, the river can wash away some evidence if it's there long enough. So, you know, I'm leaning toward the river.
So, Vinnie, her dogs rarely, if ever, bark. All of a sudden, November 13th, early morning hours, her dogs are barking. She's wondering what in the world happened. And when she learned of the murder, she thought, oh my gosh. And then to read that affidavit, it's Blaine, where she lives. What if he was around close to her home? That has to be something that people there are thinking about. But she mentioned rivers. We showed you Thorn Creek. She also mentioned Snake River. I heard that a lot from the locals throughout that geographic area that I showed you as a possibility, because it's a swift moving river that goes and merges with Clearwater, that goes east through the state of Idaho as another possibility. But looking back at this map, okay, my third option, Vinnie, that is consistent with this affidavit as well, is Palouse Drive, which is really South Moscow, still kind of in the city's that top kind of line that connects Moscow and Pullman area through Sand Drive. We have video of that today too, because guess where that intersects, Vinnie? Johnson, Washington, where his phone was pinging. And those, the next day, remember when his phone goes dark there, Johnson, Idaho, that's that intersection, Sand and Johnson. And then this affidavit says that at around 5:25 a.m., at least 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington start picking up the suspect vehicle, white Hyundai Elantra. And the first camera that picks this vehicle up that morning coming back into town is from Johnson Road. This is not the main road into town, Vinnie. This is Johnson Road that turns into Johnson Avenue. We have that 1300 Johnson Road that's mentioned in the affidavit. And as soon as you pass this sign entering Pullman, on the right there's a property management company. You can clearly see those security cameras watching that Johnson Road. So that has to be the way he took the back road into town. It was very revealing today. Part of this Johnson Road, Vinnie, that we've been on a couple of times now, it's gravel, it's dirt, it's mud. It's not all paved. To ping in from that Johnson Road back into town. And ultimately, these pings, these videos, it's around an hour loop from Moscow back into Pullman. That would be consistent with any of those first 2 routes, either the first one through Sand Drive or Thorn Creek Drive.
It's so revealing when you actually see these roads and how there is absolutely nothing. And the reason I think that's significant is if, in fact, they prove that his car is there and he's driving the car, what's the innocent explanation for driving through the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night into the early morning hour? It makes no sense. There's nowhere to go. There's no place to see. You said you couldn't even find a place to get lunch. I mean, this is not like driving around the suburbs. It's not like driving
Vinnie,
around.
there was no restroom.
There's nothing, no restroom, right? Wow. So, speaking of, and a lot of people are saying Snake River. Snake River on that map, that's the ones all the way at the bottom. That's the area where he's,
yes.
Is his cell phone caught there, or is he just caught on video at the coffee place and the Albertsons food market?
I'm glad you bring this up, because what I just showed you is the route possibilities immediately following the murders, right? And then the next, hours later morning, when his cell pings back at the crime scene. And then he makes his way south to the grocery store an hour away in Clarkston, Washington, where Lewiston, Idaho, Clarkston, on the state line there, the Snake River is the Snake River is the state line. That bridge, that would be where that river would be located that we showed you, where he went to the grocery store. He's caught on surveillance video, and his phone is consistent with being there as well. So unless someone stole his phone and his car, how do you explain this?
Yeah, what's the explanation? They're going to need an explanation as to why he's driving in the middle of nowhere and then goes back the next day. Unless they're going to try to say he has some girlfriend in Blaine. But I don't think there's any evidence of that. Look at this, miles of nothing. Absolute mile. And who would want to drive there at night anyway, because there's not even going to be any lights anywhere? What's this body of water right here? Is this the creek or Snake River? Do we know?
This is, I believe, what was that? That is the Lewiston and Clarkston. That has to be the Snake River, where it intersects with the Clearwater River, Vinnie.
that's a big body of water.
That's that large and that wide. That would be the largest body of water. Other streams and creeks, as they're called, are more like ditches. Like we showed you the Thorn Creek. That would be what they look like. But the biggest, largest one and swift moving would be Snake River, down there where Lewiston and Clarkston is.
If this is the suspect, and if he's down there, and if he's trying to get rid of a weapon in a body of water, that seems to be the one where you'd have to look. And I don't know if they've searched there. I'm sure they've thought about it, and they may have even have sent people down there without us knowing. Did anyone in any of your travels say that they've seen FBI or divers or anyone anywhere?
No, no one has mentioned that, but I'm telling you, all the locals that we've seen, they have their theories. They put this together. They're confirming what we're investigating because they live it, they see it. It's been really fascinating to catch up. And they know when we walk in, if we ask anything, they're, oh, we've read that. We know exactly what you're talking about. They're following this case intently because nothing like this has ever happened here, and it is international news, and they're also trying to figure it out as well.
All right. Chanley Painter with us. She'll rejoin us in just a moment. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the surviving roommate, because so many people have been questioning why she didn't call 911. What's going on in her mind? Like, what could she possibly be thinking? Coming up, we're going to speak with a woman who had an extremely similar circumstance to what Dylan, the surviving roommate, had. And we'll find out what she did and how she felt. That's next.
If this case ever comes back, I'll try the damn thing again because Mark Jensen belongs in prison.
Mark Jensen.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of intentional homicide.
She was poisoned by him using ethylene glycol.
Set to be retried after his conviction was overturned.
He deserves a new trial that is a fair trial.
Now a second jury will determine his fate.
And our cameras will bring you every moment.
The antifreeze murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 9/8 Central. Only on Court TV.
Only at Denny's.
The other two roommates were there at the time of the attack?
All the information that we have from our investigation is that, yes, they were.
Okay, but they were unhurt.
That is correct.
So is there any explanation as to why it took so long then for someone to call 911? You have surviving witnesses to an incident at 3 or 4 in the morning, and the 911 call didn't come until noon?
I don't think I ever said that they were witnesses. I said they were there. So, you know, we don't know why that call came in at noon.
This was one of the first big shocking moments in uncovering some of the facts of what happened inside that home in Moscow, Idaho. There were 2 surviving roommates. Now, at that presser, the police chief didn't want to give out too much information, but it turns out one of the 2 did actually witness things, and one of the 2 did actually see the killer. Yet still, no call was made until noon the next day. Until noon, 8 hours later. Let me read for you from the affidavit. If you haven't heard this yet, sit down. DM, those are the initials of one of the surviving roommates, Dylan, stated she was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by what she said sounded like Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which were located on the 3rd floor. A short time later, Dylan said she heard who she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Dylan stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Xana's room. Dylan then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan stated she opened her door for the 3rd time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. Dylan described the figure, 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past Dylan as she stood in, quote, frozen shock phase. Frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the back sliding glass door. Dylan locked herself in her room after seeing the male. Dylan did not state that she recognized the male, and that led investigators to believe that the murderer left the scene. Take a listen now. Here's Captain Lanier talking about now the phone call, the 911 call that was made 8 hours later.
On the morning of November 13th at 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed to the Whitcomb Dispatch Center reporting an unconscious person. The call originated from inside the residence and was made from the phone of one of the surviving roommates.
All right, doesn't say who made the call, so we don't know who made the call, and it's an unconscious person. That was the second head scratcher that we all had, right? Who is that? Is that one of the victims? A bloody victim you're calling unconscious? Or could it potentially be someone who passed out? We don't know. We don't know. What we do know, though, is that description from the affidavit. We put together our rendition of what the floor plan is and what may have happened here. DM, that's Dylan's room. We know that we believe the killer was up on the 3rd floor, came down those stairs next to Dylan's room, and then went into Xana's room where she is with Ethan. That's where they were murdered. And then from the affidavit, Dylan describes opening up the door a little and then seeing those bushy eyes on this figure as he walked past her and then out the sliding doors. So why not call 911? What possibly could her state of mind be in an extremely traumatic moment like this at a young age like that? We have someone who experienced something very similar. Joining me now in Santa Monica, California, a woman who found her roommate after she'd been attacked in their sorority house back in 1992. She's been speaking out in support and in defense of this surviving roommate out in Idaho. Alana Zabel is with us. Alana, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that we can speak with you. Could you describe briefly, take us back in time to your experience, and then I want your take on how someone might react, and tell us how you reacted. So can you explain that to us?
Sure. Yeah, my situation is scarily similar. 2 of my housemates were all in the same sorority, lived downstairs, so 3-level home. 4 of us lived on the 2nd level. My bedroom was a converted patio. It's an old Buffalo home. And then above us, there were some other students from the University of Buffalo, but they were not in our sorority. And that night, we all went out, and we went to multiple places, including a Sigma Chi party, which is eerie as well. We were hammered, and my housemate who was injured went home first, and she had the keys, so she was going to let us in. This is pre-cell phone where you can text someone. So I was the last to come home that night. 2 of the 4 of us on the 2nd level did not come home that night. When I arrived, I was ringing the doorbell, kicking the door, banging the door, screaming her name. She was not responding. So my friend who had dropped me off noticed that the bathroom door was open. So I said, hey, can you boost me up? And she, interlocks her fingers and heists me up through the bathroom door, or I'm sorry, the bathroom window. And I crawl through the window, not knowing that I'm wiping off fingerprints. And the screen is in the bathtub. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And I put the screen back in the window. There's a weird smell and some, it was in a disarray. But again, you live with 5 people. You just think somebody was messy that day. You don't think the worst. Then I went to her bedroom door. It was ajar, and I saw her foot in the down position. And I called her name, and she didn't respond. And I heard some heavy breathing. So I just assumed maybe her boyfriend was over, and that was it. I went to my room at the front of the house, and I went to sleep. I started to go to sleep. About 15 minutes later, I heard someone step into my room. So I lifted up my head, and as I turned, there was no one there. But 10 seconds after that, the front door closed. Now we know that's when he left, because no one else came home until 9 o'clock the next morning. So he basically thought that my room might have been the exit, because he didn't know he'd come through the window. So I went to sleep. 9 o'clock the next morning, Carrie, one of my housemates, came home, and she came multiple times to my room saying, there's this really awful smell. It smells like vomit. Did you throw up last night? And I kept saying no, no, and dismissed her. She came again because the neighbors upstairs needed us to move the car. So we had to go into the bedroom of our housemate who was attacked. And that's when we found her unconscious. Now, I saw no blood. When I went in there and Carrie was trying to take her pulse and I was shaking her feet and screaming her name, and there was liquid everywhere and liquid caking her face and disarray that I don't want to describe, but no blood. So I called 911, the paramedics arrived, and when the first paramedic walked into the bedroom, stepped foot, and I was right behind him, he stepped back in shock and said, "Holy, look at all of this blood." And as soon as he said it, and I'm looking into the room like that, the mattress is soaked, the walls are full of blood, the whole entire room was full of blood. And that's why in so many parts that I am defensive of how the mind works in a heightened state of fight or flight in a situation like this. That's one particular case. So then from there, basically we're flooded with investigators and detectives and also my housemate went to the hospital, obviously, and she was in a coma for months. Thankfully, she survived. But there are so many similarities to this, and I am in complete defense of Dylan because there's so much we just don't know. And these are trauma responses when someone freezes. We just finished 2 years of COVID. Seeing someone in a mask, you're not sure. I know it's probably a much different kind of a mask. It's a party house. I know personally, if there was a fraternity prank, sometimes we would kidnap, fraternity brothers, and they would kidnap one of us, like as pranks. You don't know if something like that is going on. And if you call the police and then you bust your friends and they get in trouble because you thought that it was something, greater and more horrific. But so besides all the variables that I think that we have in defense of her, in that situation, you just don't want it to be the worst case scenario. You don't know it. It's not your reality. And because I believe she passed. Go ahead. I'm gonna let you jump in.
No. But it's fascinating to hear this because as you're saying this, it's making sense because you have information about the crime, the attack on your roommate, yet you still went to sleep, not realizing what it was until looking back on it and not even seeing the blood that was everywhere. I hope people are listening to you. And I hope people are watching now because that's one thing I think a lot of us have been shocked by is the attack on this surviving roommate. Difficult enough to be in the position she's in, and we don't know a lot. And my guess is it's something similar to what you experienced, but eventually we will find out. Ilana, is there anything else you need to add? Go ahead.
Just one other thing, and like even when you reread the affidavit and I was watching you, the words and the language are not alarming, right? It could go either way. When you say, "It's okay, I'm here to help you," or "There's someone here," these are phrases that are not alarming that would say, "Oh, something awful is happening, let me call 911," right?
Absolutely. Ilana, really, fortunately, your roommate survived, you're okay, and it turned out that way for you guys, but I think it's extremely valuable when we look at these cases to not jump to judgment so quickly, especially for someone who's been through an extremely traumatic situation. Ilana, thanks so much.
She's going to have a lifetime of healing. Thanks for having me on, Vinnie.
Thank you so much. Really important stuff. All right. When we come back, folks, Chanley Painter, still live in Moscow. She's got more for us. Don't go away. The life of Alec Murdaugh is bizarre. It is complicated.
This great South Carolina attorney is charged with the murders of his own wife and son.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Who exactly is this guy?
Everybody knows the Murdaughs. It's a household name.
A family that is so powerful.
Who knows where this thing is going to end?
This case needs to be resolved. We need to put this behind us and move on.
Murdaugh Family Murders. Live coverage beginning January 23rd. Only on...
Hey, Bryan. Ready to do it.
How are you feeling?
How you feeling, Bryan? Ready to do it.
Are you ready to go to Idaho?
Ready to do it. Last time in Pennsylvania, Bryan.
Always one of my favorite parts of being a reporter out in the field is when that perp is brought in and you can scream things at him, ask him questions, try to get some sort of reaction. But there he was, the accused Idaho killer, just walking straight into the courtroom in Pennsylvania. Now is in Idaho, is expected back in court tomorrow, and Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter, of course, is in Moscow tonight, will be in the courtroom tomorrow. What can we expect from tomorrow's hearing?
We're expecting it to be a brief hearing. It's a status hearing. And remember, it's at the request of his public defender, Ann Taylor, last week. When the judge asked about scheduling a preliminary hearing, she asked for more time. So we're expecting tomorrow for her to tell the judge whether or not he's going to invoke his right to this preliminary hearing or waive it. And as you know, Vinnie, a preliminary hearing is a big day because that's when the prosecution is going to call witnesses, put on evidence. The defense can cross-examine those witnesses, give us maybe some more insight into the evidence they have, because they have to establish probable cause in front of this magistrate judge, who will then, if the judge agrees, bounds it over into the district court here in the state of Idaho. If that does happen, then that's the time that Bryan Kohberger would be formally arraigned and enter a guilty or not guilty plea. Now, he also can show up tomorrow, and he is going to be there in person, probably shackled again in his jailhouse orange, and waive all of that preliminary hearing, which means that he would automatically be bound over into the district court, and they would likely schedule him for that arraignment, Vinnie. So that's what we're expecting here. And we know that that front row of the gallery will again be reserved for family members of the victims. I just spoke with the family attorney for the Gonsalves family, and he's telling me that he, the attorney, will be there representing the family tomorrow, Vinnie.
And there's two schools of thought on the preliminary hearing. Most defense attorneys always want to have it because you get, again, another look at the evidence against the defendant. You lock people into testimony, and you have a much better idea of their exact theory of the case. But then some, in high-profile cases like this, don't want to do it because they don't want the court of public opinion, including potential jurors, to hear more of the evidence before the trial. So sometimes it's a little different in the high-profile cases. We'll see what happens. Extremely important decision. I mean, right now, the Larry Miglietti, accused of murdering his wife Maya, they're doing a preliminary hearing down in California, and it's going to take days and days and days. So it's like a mini trial sometimes. All right, let's get to the search warrant for the defendant's apartment. Search warrant is still sealed.
That's right. So there are court documents across the border in Washington State, Whitman County, where Pullman, Washington is, where his apartment is located on WSU campus. Remember, last Friday, after his arrest, news of his arrest, his apartment was being searched by the Washington State University Police Department at the request of the Moscow Police Department. We witnessed them taking several things out of his apartment that we've been in front of and showed you on your show the past week. And so, of course, we're trying to access that search warrant affidavit, what any allegations it alleges, but it's under seal. But we did gain access to the actual order sealing that affidavit. Here's a look at it. It has some interesting language, Vinnie. First, it says, you know, this order is necessary because of premature public disclosure of the details of this law enforcement investigation will create a serious and imminent threat to effective law enforcement and could result in the premature end to this investigation, which could create a threat to public safety. Interesting. It goes on to say the personal privacy of the witnesses, victims, and victim families' names in the application filed in this case also supports the sealing of the documents found in this matter. And then this stuck out to me. It says it is estimated the investigation will likely be concluded within 2 months from this date. And this was filed on December 30th, the day that he was arrested, or well, the hours after, and his apartment was searched. So this order is for that approximate time. It's a temporary sealing, and it will be unsealed unless there's further action on March the 1st. And again, that's the search warrant that has an affidavit for it with probable cause of the search warrant for his apartment. And what they were looking for specifically in that apartment would be really revealing, Vinnie.
Oh, yes. Very, very revealing, the search warrant affidavits, sometimes more revealing than the arrest affidavit. But again, it's sealed, so we don't know at this point. Really interesting, though, the language about it. It could be a threat to public safety. If it's after he gets arrested, What exactly does that mean? I don't know. I could see the threat if he is still free and out there and the names are out there. He could potentially, a suspect could go after some witnesses against him or have someone go after him. But again, I know as soon as they unseal it, though, Chanley Painter will have it for us, folks. Let's talk about campus, because the story started with a campus that was terrified, afraid to go out. A lot of them left Moscow, but classes are back in session now.
Yeah, that's right, Vinnie. I was there today a couple of times on the campus of the University of Idaho, not far from where I am here at the courthouse. Such a stark difference from the end of last semester when we were here, when there still wasn't an arrest, no suspect told by the police, than there is today. It is jam-packed. People walking, students walking all across campus. The parking lots are full. I hadn't seen that before. A lot of activity as students. And as we've been out and about, we've been speaking to the students there and how they're feeling. And there's this overwhelming sense of relief now that there's been an arrest and the process of justice is starting to unfold. Let's take a listen.
I think with the arrest, a lot more people feel a bit safer to come back. But I still think there's just a little bit of fear going around.
I grew up in the mindset of always be alert, always be aware, and never be an idiot and just trust people blindly. And with the military, you also learn to defend yourself.
I even stopped by the frat row where one of the victims, Ethan Chapin, was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. It's cold. It's hard to talk out here, Vinnie. But the fraternity, you can definitely sense a little more pep in their step now that there has been an arrest. No, not as many eyes on that frat house. Off camera, I spoke to one of the brothers of Ethan, who was his very good friend. They were at the party with Ethan and Xana in the hours leading up to him, texting Ethan before the murders, and they are still obviously trying to heal, but he showed me a bracelet that said, "Live like Ethan," and that is now the motto they're carrying forward, Vinnie.
Great that they can celebrate his life and try to remember him that way. This campus, these students have been through so much, and the families as well. Chanley Painter in Moscow tonight. Thank you so much, Chan.